What's up, lovers of whiskey and watchers of YouTube? I am the Malt Activist, and these are my top 10 Highland whiskies in no particular order. Okay, so what happened a couple of weeks ago, I dropped this video, which was my, I think, top 5 Speyside whiskies of all time. And guess what? I awarded top prize to whiskey that wasn't even from Speyside. It was from the Highland. So, just shows you how much research gets done here at Malt Activist headquarters. That's right. In my defense, there's this growing viewpoint that you know, Speyside and Highland are just kind of one region, and even if you go and visit some distilleries like Macallan, for example, they'd be like, yeah, you can call us a Speyside whiskey or a Highland whiskey. It doesn't matter. We're all the same. And for some reason, I had that thought in my head when I was counting down my whiskeys for my Speyside whiskies, and I was like, yeah, of course, GLENGOYNE, of course it's a Speyside whiskey. What else could it be? Well, it could be a Highland whiskey, and that's exactly what it was. So I have I have no words other than to say, I'm sorry, I messed it up. I cocked it up only because I'm a useless researcher who thinks I know everything. So having said that, I've decided to hopefully kind of redeem myself by making a list of my favorite Highland whiskies. And I've made sure that every single one on this list is a Highland whiskey. Okay, I've done my research. I went on Wikipedia and I checked everything, and I made sure I checked all the area codes and everything. And I called up the distilleries and I was like, hey man, where are you guys from? You guys from Highland? You sure? You 100%? And they all agreed, and they all confirmed that they were from the Highlands. And so based on that, I want to put together my top 10 Highland whiskies. Now, the reason these are my top 10 Highland whiskies is because these are the ones I'm more familiar with. If I've left out, and 100% I will have left out a lot of distilleries that you might like, it's purely because I've not had enough experience with them. Legit, you know. I won't go into names. There's so many of them that I don't know anything about, and I wish I did. And I'll probably make a second list of my newly found, Highland distilleries. But for now, here's a list of whiskeys that I'm familiar with, or distilleries that I'm familiar with, that I've had a fair amount to drink from, enough to form an opinion, enough to make it into my top 10. So, without further ado, let's go. So my first whiskey on this list, again in no particular order, is BALBLAIR. I got introduced to BALBLAIR through a friend of mine who was incidentally a whiskey ambassador for a different whiskey. So ironically, he's the one who got me introduced to BALBLAIR, which just shows how good a whiskey it is. And back in the day, they used to do only vintages, you know, and I was kind of fascinated by that because a lot of the distilleries were either putting out age statements or non-age statements, but BALBLAIR was putting out vintages, which I thought was very cool. Of course, you had to go and check how old the actual whiskey was, and they would mention it fairly, plainly on the label and stuff. So yeah, some 2000s, 2005s were very, very good vintages. I remember drinking the oldest BALBLAIR I had, I think, was a 1983 distilled. Again, at the same gentleman's house, who's a whiskey ambassador, brand ambassador for a different whiskey. He had a bottle on him, so I was lucky enough to try that. Nowadays, they've come out with this whole age statement thing, which I think is geared towards travel retail. So you have the 12, the 15. I think you have the 17 as well as the 18. And a 25-year-old. So very, very targeted attempt to capture the travel retail market, which is a good thing for any distillery. I think it's good for sales. So that's what they're doing. So yes, so if you haven't tried a BALBLAIR, it's an interesting dram. It's quite fruity, floral, more or less across the line, and different maturations will give you different flavor profiles. But yes, definitely, if you haven't tried it, it's worth the while picking one out and trying it. Here's another whiskey that I did not know much about until I was introduced to it by a friend of mine, is the Tullibardine. Quite recently built in 1947, this Highland distillery again produces a fairly sweet and fruity and floral spirit. Their core range includes a whiskey called the Sovereign, which is matured in first fill bourbon barrels. They have the 225, and I always used to wonder what the 225 or the 228 or the 500 stood for, and it's how big the cask is. So that's something new. So for example, the 225 Sauternes cask finish is actually finished off in a 225 liter barrel of Sauternes wine. The 228 is a Burgundy cask finish, so 228 liter cask of ex-Burgundy used to finish off this whiskey. And then finally the 500 stands for 500 liters of a sherry cask, which was used to finish off this whiskey. They also have a couple of age statements. They have a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old, and I believe a 25-year-old. I've tried the 15 and the 20, haven't had the pleasure of trying the 25. Too rich for my pocket. Waiting for a good friend to buy it and let me drink it from his stash. So yes, so the Tullibardine I think flies under the radar. Some old school Tullies are very, very nice. I completely forget a very old Tully that I had at a friend's place at a tasting. This is many, many years ago, and I remember liking it a lot, but I think I've completely forgot about it. So if you know which one I drank, please let me know in the comments below. That would be great, wouldn't it? If you're like, oh dude, you were at my house, you drank this whiskey. That'd be amazing. But yes, the Tullibardine, another Highland whiskey, which I think you should try if you haven't tried. The Old Pulteney. I've been drinking this whiskey for a very long time, and I'm ashamed to say that I got introduced to this whiskey by the infamous Mr. Jim Murray. And this is very, 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 very early on in my career as a whiskey drinker, when I happened across the Whiskey Bible, and the whiskey of the year that year was the Old Pulteney, 21 years old, and I was fascinated. I was like, oh my god, who is this guy who knows so much about whiskey, and what is this Old Pulteney 21? And at that time it was very hard to get, come by because of this Whiskey Bible, but eventually I found it, and well, not too much surprise, I really, really liked it, and I thought it was a fantastic whiskey. However, I slowly started disassociating myself with everything Jim Murray said, because it stopped making any sense. However, I am thankful to him for introducing me to Old Pulteney, which I think is a fantastic Highland whiskey, and if you haven't tried it, you really must. The 21 is definitely a work of art, as is the 17, the 12, and they now have more recent releases. I think the 17 is discontinued, so in its place I believe they have the 18. And the 15 is a fantastic dram, quite maritime, quite salty, but at the same time quite sweet and flavorful as well. Very, very robust delivery. I like that about him. There's nothing wrong that you can pinpoint in any Old Pulteney. Maybe some of their travel retail, like the Nos Lighthouse and the other ones I forget, they might not, how should I say this, be as complex and robust as their age statement siblings, but still very fine whiskeys in their own right. But if you really want to experience a good Old Pulteney, try and find some single casks at cask strength. They're quite a revelation, as I discovered. I luckily was able to pick one or two off an auction site, and the age statements, they won't let you down, definitely. So yes, so if you haven't tried the Old Pulteney, I would highly suggest getting hold of the 12 or the 15 or the 18 and seeing which one tickles your fancy. Mine, I think, from the 3, the 15 is a good sweet spot in terms of the complexity and the price that it comes in. So yes, my 2 thumbs up for the Old Pulteney. Another whiskey that I recently came across is the LOCH LOMOND. That's right. We had a tasting quite recently with the brand ambassador, and I think it was the first time I ever had the LOCH LOMOND, and I was quite pleasantly surprised that a whiskey of such such decent quality with a nice array of maturations and flavor profiles. That's what I like the best about them, is that even within their core range, they have a nice sort of variation in terms of the maturations, which allows you to try different flavors across the range. And I believe they have a couple of 12s, they have a couple of 14s, and in fact I have some here behind me. Hold on. Yeah, here we go. So there's a 14-year-old that you can see for yourself, and a 12 here. It says since 1814. Oh, this is under the inch Morin label, which is nice. So this is a 14-year-old. So this one's been matured in American oak and finished off in French oak, whereas this 12-year-old, blah. Refill bourbon barrels and so it's a mix of bourbon, refill, and recharred, whatever that means. Anyway, the point I'm making is quite a number of different flavor profiles within their core range. So definite whiskey to try if you haven't already. So yes, Loch Lomond also gets my stamp of approval. Our next whiskey in the list is the Glenmorangie, and I think the only reason I have them here in this list is because they own Ardbeg, and I'm afraid that if I don't include them in my top 10, they will stop selling Ardbeg to me, or they will shut down the distillery, which is something that I cannot afford to happen. So just for that reason alone, I have Glenmorangie here in my top 10 list of Highland whiskies you must try before you die. Now, I'm just kidding. Glenmorangie is a fantastic distillery. They produce a lovely spirit. It is apparently the best-selling single malt whiskey in the UK. Now, I did not know that. I think it had the capacity of about like 10 million bottles, which is like 7 million liters. And about 60% of that sells in the UK, which is absolutely amazing. I mean, I had no idea that was true. And apparently they've been number one since 1983. So obviously they're doing something right, other than buying Ardbeg and revitalizing it, which is also very good. So Glenmorangie, the original, definitely a beautiful whiskey. Then they have all the wine finishes, the Quinta Ruban at 12, which is the port finish. Then you have the Nectador, which is Sauternes house finish, and then you have the La Santa, which is the sherry finish. The 18 something rare and exclusive, whatever you want to call it, is also, in my opinion, a fantastic dram. The 25 I've tried is lovely. I think I've reviewed a 1989 vintage Glenmorangie as well. I think that was finished off in Côte de Rune wine casks. That was an amazing whiskey as well. A friend of mine lent it to me to try it. I did not buy it. But yeah, so there's so many whiskeys that you can try if you pick Glenmorangie, and there's very little that's bad about them, honestly. And if you haven't tried them, I highly suggest that you do. Glengoyne, one of my first loves. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Glengoyne, largely because it was one of the first few whiskeys that I ever bought, and believe it or not, it was the Glengoyne 21, and I believe I bought it for something like equivalent of like 65-70 pounds, which is crazy considering what they're going for today. But I immediately fell in love with it, and at that time, I didn't know anything about whiskey. All I saw was the color on that whiskey, and I was like, oh my god, that is amazing. And I remember buying it and drinking it, and then buying it and drinking it again, and then finally, when things started to go a little crazy, I think I bought a couple and then sort of kept it to myself. Here it is, the 21-year-old, and look at that color, it's beautiful. And everything good about a whiskey you will find in this bottle. So but they have these other ones as well that I absolutely adore. Their cask strength series is absolutely amazing, while kind of going down in quality in my opinion, but overall a brilliant dram. Their teapot dram, if you haven't tried, and if you can find, is a really good whiskey. It's an homage to a throwback story of how the workers were allowed 3 large drams a day at the distillery, and for the weaklings who couldn't drink all 3 drams, they would, pour it in a pour their drams in a large copper kettle, and then the hardened the seasoned among the lot would then help themselves to the extra whiskey from the teapot, and hence it's called the teapot dram. And I thought that was a wonderful story, and they sort of paid homage to it in the form of a very high strength sherry matured whiskey, which was very good. Hey, I'll buy a story any day of the week. So Glengoyne, I may not be a huge fan of the 10, 12, 17, but that's just me. But but the 21 is amazing. Their cask strength versions are awesome. If you can find the teapot dram, that's also very good. So yes. So again, if you haven't tried a Glengoyne, do go out and buy one and try it and see what you think. As far as I'm concerned, I think you definitely should. EDRADOUR. Have you heard of EDRADOUR? If you haven't, let me tell you about them. It is one of the smallest distilleries in Scotland. It used to be run by 3 people. It is now run by 2 people. Can you believe that? That is absolutely amazing. I don't know how they do it. I wish I'd visit the distillery. I haven't. I was just wondering, if 2 people run the place, who the hell is going to give me a distillery tour? I don't know. Anyway, but the cool thing is, they produce how many? 18 casks a week. So that's exactly 3 casks a day if you take a day off, and which is ridiculously low levels of production. And they're owned by the Signatory Vintage Company, which is the independent bottling company, and that's where you'll find, in my opinion, some of the best EDRADOURs. I found this 10-year-old cask strength, which was absolutely stunning. There was another 10-year-old sherry finish at 46%. Not finish, I think it was a sherry matured whiskey that you can find under the Signatory label, which is very nice. Also, straight from the cask, that's a great series to have. They come in these 50 cl bottles, and they're straight from the cask, so they're super cask strength, and have very cool maturations. The one I have, I think it's some sort of wine maturation. I completely forget. I think it's a Bordeaux wine maturation, and it's very tasty. So EDRADOUR, I think, flies under the radar, and not many people know about it. So if you haven't tried an EDRADOUR, gotta try it. CLYNELISH, everyone's favorite, or is it? Well, I'm heavily influenced by Serge Valentin, the legend, the man behind Whiskey Fun, who loves his CLYNELISH. And because of reading so much about him writing about CLYNELISH, I got really curious about CLYNELISH, and I started going and looking for them. And to my dismay, the only CLYNELISH original I could find was the CLYNELISH 14 and the Flora and Fauna CLYNELISH, and kind of most of everything else was from independent bottlings. And the reason for that is CLYNELISH is owned by Diageo, and hence is part of a major blending exercise that serves, I think, the gold label reserve, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of the CLYNELISH goes into blending Johnnie Walker Gold Label, and a very little bit of it is left behind to bottle as single malts. And the reason I think I'm so infatuated with CLYNELISH, other than Serge Valentin, is the fact that it used to be Brora. That's right. So the first distillery that was built, called CLYNELISH, right, operated, and it was supposed to be so good that no spirit was ever given to blenders. And this, I'm talking like in the 1800s, right? And just because the distillery was built in 1819, and then in 1967 they built a new distillery. They built it as almost as a replica of Kalila, by the way. So they built a new distillery, at which point they were called CLYNELISH A and CLYNELISH B. And so, but the excise guys were like, yo guys, you can't have two distilleries running under the same name, what's wrong with you? And so then they changed the name of the old distillery to Brora, and then that and that became cult, and nobody realized until Brora was shut down in 1983. I think they have plans of reopening it. If you know more than I do, please put it in the comments below. So yes, CLYNELISH, a lot of good independent bottles of CLYNELISH floating around. If you can get your hands on the CLYNELISH 14 or the Flora and Fauna or the Game of Thrones edition, which is part of the Diageo special release, get your hands on that. Otherwise, I think they're quite easily available within the independent bottling market, and a definite Highland whiskey to try. And ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to our last Highland distillery that I think should be in my top 10. In fact, I think it tops my top 10. So without further ado, my number one Highland distillery is Ardbeg. So thank you for watching this video. I'm the Malt Activist. Until next time, peace.